So Autumn in the River part 4, we're going to try and work on these darker branches. That means damping this tree on the left. And I have a mixture of ultramarine, ochre and crimson, quite dry. Obviously the branches are only going to be visible at intervals, sometimes hidden behind foliage or leaves. A slightly richer mixture of those colours. Quite a warm day today, so everything's drying really fast. These branches sort of disappear into this central area of haze of leaves. Let's try and work from left to right. So coming up here, using a number 3 round brush, trying to control the thickness of the line with the angle of the brush partly. So a higher, steeper angle gives a smaller line or a thinner line, presents less brush to the paper surface. Branch coming all the way around there, branch going up there. So I'm going to try and keep this paper from drying. Some description of smaller branches. I'm relying on the gum arabic in the watercolour solution to inhibit the flow of colour. See if I can make that colour a little bit richer. It's too much. But there is a darkness to that branch. Hanging over the river there. Just letting go on the pressure of the brush. Yeah, that'll do. Let's look at this area below here. So the difference with this area is that it is much nearer. All this side is a lot nearer than everywhere else in the image. The reflections going down into the water are sort of dirty ochre colour. I'm going to damp that a little bit, but I like for this edge to be fairly sharp along here, and then the reflections sort of go down into the water. I'm going to use a stippling action. So the edge of the river recedes in perspective in a series of little steps like that, and the reflection, as I've said, sort of goes more or less straight down. It's a little bit blurred there possibly. Flat brush. Let's try and break that up a little bit with a flat brush. Nylon flat brush. So more damping. Typically of watercolour, This is all about leaving out to make the impression of light against dark, or shapes, controlling shapes by in effect not painting them. So these grasses here on the left, just sort of working the brush back into those negative shapes to make an impression of grasses. Take the colour straight down. It's all quite dark in the river here, which is obviously much nearer than. So I am hopefully making a dry edge against the grasses, trying to paint into negative shapes here, and a damp effect in the river, in the reflection in the river. Two elements of watercolour, or two ways of using watercolour. Coming together, little bits at a time. See if I can make that go down a little bit further. Just damp this edge. So the grasses will appear longer, nearer. See if I can make those an impression of those shapes. And blur this other edge against water, where there's still some reflection of leaf and tree above. This is very wet ground, so there are gaps in the grasses where the colour, the dark muddy colour of water is coming through. Little bits of that effect coming through, little bits of darker water. This is all in wet here. I don't think you'd be able to walk in this area, you'd think. So more edges of grasses, working that way back into the edge of green. Just break that up a little bit. I'm going to make this too detailed because nowhere else in this watercolour is as detailed as this, so that wouldn't be fitting somehow. Little bits darker, just there perhaps, there. These mini bays going back in the watercolour, going back in the river. See if I can make that just a little bit darker there. So I'm hoping that's brought that bank forwards. There's a little more work to do to that. That's the essence of the technique involved in painting hard edge and into soft, is to do with damping and controlling the spread of the colour against a sharp edge, a dry edge. Bits of colour in there reflected as well on damp. I would turn this image this way and look at the symmetry for the reflection in water. So the branch is reflected almost like a mirror in the river, which means that I damp this area, the branch is somewhere, this branch is somewhere there. It's always good to have a look at the image from a slightly different point of view anyway. So that branch does something like that. Doesn't matter if it gets a little bit distorted. Blur and diffuse. Make that go away there. Yeah, more branches reflected nearer. And I suppose there's more depth in the reflection anyway, more depth of tone, which I can see better, more clearly now, because I'm looking at it almost afresh, being that I'm not familiar with this view, so it somehow refreshes the eye and the brain to see things from a different point of view. There should be a deeper sort of greenish grey reflection colour here along the far bank, something to contrast that mist effect. And then along a little bit further here, slightly richer reflections. Richer colours anyway. Come along this edge. That's producing a hard edge and a soft edge against the bit of beach there, what looks like beach in this image. Get a chance to rework some of these reflections a little bit. It's rather damp. Should be slightly darker there. The essence of working on damp is really to keep the second colour, the second wetting, which carries the colour, very dry. Otherwise there'll be backgrounds. That's why this brush is wetting and this brush is adding really very dry colour and not wet at all, not much wet. So that tree comes down here as a reflection, then divides, and the reflection is less distinct, less clear in each case. Let's see if I can match up these reflections with the thing that's being reflected. I had a little bit of drawing as a guide for this. One sort of leans into the image a bit. I'm going to turn it the right way up and have a look at these reflections. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Let's have a look at this side. I need for this to dry off a little more. I might do a little bit more to that. Let's have a look at the whole thing. There perhaps is a bit more going on this near bank, but that's about it as far as most of the painting is concerned. If I work on it too much, it'll undo some of these wet into wet effects, and already there's dry edges forming. But to let it dry naturally, drying it with a dryer will somehow make the colour worse, or make the image, the colours won't be as fresh somehow. So that was Autumn in the River, a soft blurred watercolour.